I've learned a lot of things about spring over the years. I didn't know much about it except it was like when Easter happened, and then I could go trout fishing for a week because you get that week out of school. But over the years, I've learned that fishing in the winter is a wonderful thing. I didn't even know you could fish in the winter when I was young because it was against the law to fish. You couldn't fish for largemouth bass. You couldn't fish for trout. There weren't any stripers, and you could go ice fishing, but I never wanted to go ice fishing. And over the years, I learned that, the things that I had been taught since I was a little kid about the fish are lethargic and you're asleep on the bottom and you're under the mud and they don't eat and they're this and they're that and they don't swim very fast and they're kind of asleep and groggy. And I learned all that stuff, and all of it, I found out, has nothing to do with reality whatsoever. And you learn it by doing, There was one February a few years back, when I was in my 40s, which is quite a few years back. I was with a friend of mine, Dick Lima, and he had this beautiful little house on this nice lake that was full of smallmouth, and it was February. And for some reason, the ice had gone out. That for that weekend, there wasn't any ice on the pond, but the pond was freezing. So we went out in the pond, and we were going around, and I was an expert at the time. I was 40. When you're 40, you're an expert about everything. But he was like 70, and he wasn't an expert about anything. But then again, he just wanted to go fishing. So we went out, and he had a boat, a little motor on it. We tooled around that lake, which was a nice-sized lake. And he said, "What are you thinking, Kenny? What do you think we should do?" And I said, "Well, we should fish slow on the bottom, with pluck rinds and big plastic worms and jigs." And so, okay. And so we did that, and we didn't catch anything. And we kept on doing it, and I kept on coming up with all the reasons why we weren't catching any fish. So he looked at me and he said, "You know what?" And he put out a big white spinnerbait. It is February, and he cast it right up close to the shore, this little rocky point, and he started burning what they call burning the spinnerbait, which he was reeling it in real fast, and it was making a wake in the water right at the surface, and wham! Guess what he caught? He caught a bass that was almost 7 pounds. Just like that, bang. Then he looked at me and he said, "Well, I think I'm just going to fish the way I like to fish." And with that, we started fishing, and he started catching fish all kinds of ways, and I wasn't catching anything, and I was fishing according to the rule book. Then we went way up to the other end of the lake, and there was this area where the water got kind of shallow, and you couldn't see the bottom, but it was like much shallower than the rest of the lake was like 25 feet deep, 30 feet deep here and there, 15 feet deep. But this place was probably 5 feet deep, and it was a big flat. Just before you get to the other end of the pond, there was this like a hump in the middle of the lake. So we're going over there, and he says, "I do well over here on what they call those crankbaits where you reel them in real fast and they vibrate. They're vibrating. Yeah, that's what." But he had one. He said, "This is my favorite." It was kind of chartreuse and yellow, and he cast it out there, and he had a casting reel that had a 6.7 to 1 speed on it. He cast it out. He started racing that reel, coming in really, really fast. All of a sudden, wham! And he hooked a big old smallmouth. And he did it again, and he did it again. So I grabbed a couple of those plugs that I had, and I had a reel that was about 5.5 to 1. And I'm reeling as fast as I can, and I'm catching fish, but he's catching like 2 fish to every fish I caught. And the water temperature is like 34 degrees, and these fish are coming right up and are slamming this plug so hard. So the next week, it was a Thursday. We're doing it on Thursdays. The next Thursday I show up, but I brought a 7.5 to 1 reel. And I put some 12-pound test line on it, which made the plug come up even higher. And we get back to that flat, and he starts catching fish. But I get that reel now, and I got that fatter line, which lifts up the plug a little bit more. And I'm casting it out there, and I start catching bass like crazy. And at the end of the day, he looks at me and says, "What'd you do?" Because he was kind of mad, because he didn't catch as many fish as I did, and he was very competitive, and I don't blame him. I said, "Well, I got a 7.5 reel, and I got a little bit bigger pound test." And he looked at me and he went, with a little look on his face, like he knew exactly what I did. And that was it. But I learned something that day. I learned that smallmouth bass and largemouth bass don't care if it's cold out. They're going to be where they're comfortable, and they're going to do what they do the way that they've always done it. And they're not buried in the bottom of the pond. They're where the water's the warmest, which is where the sun can hit that bottom. And that big old largemouth, he was quite happy right there on that point. I guess it was a good place to eat food, you know. And so from that day on, I learned that you can fish for freshwater bass in the middle of the winter with crankbaits. Not a problem catching them at all. The only problem you have is that if you believe you can't catch them, then you're not going to fish for them. And if you don't fish for them, you're not going to catch them. And I found it to be true over the years that is actually always the case.